Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good.
I feel like I'm coming out of my seasonally affected disorder syndrome.
That's always a good sign, but that's probably because the weather was so gorgeous today.
It was, and it was lovely yesterday, and I got to spend a few hours today and yesterday outside with my kiddos, and that was really nice.
Yeah, I was really hoping that I wouldn't have the packed day that I had today and could sneak away out to Moss Rock because of how just perfect the weather was for it, but alas, it was not in the cards.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe Thursday.
Maybe. I mean, I guess we'll see. This week is relatively packed for me, though, so I'm not sure.
I don't think that I've ever experienced sort of the sad syndrome before. Just normally because even in the winter, keep busy and find winter activities to do. But that's more difficult because of COVID this year. So I feel like I really felt it this year. But the weather was really good at the beginning of this week. Actually took my kids on a hike on Sunday that was nice, even though it was chilly and overcast. It was still okay to get out, and even that was nice. And I think we've only got a little more than a month of standard hours, and we'll go to daylight savings in about a month. So I'm looking forward to that.
And this might be the first year that I think daylight savings is worth it.
I'm so looking forward to it. So, um, Lang, Michael Biehn, as Lang in The Mandalorian. What you find?
So I won't go into too many details just because I don't want to have to inject the spoiler warning again. But he was in season 2, episode 5, and the name of that episode was The Jedi. So it was his character
Oh
was the one
yeah.
that faced off against the Mandalorian.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was him.
Yeah, once I clarified which episode he was in, and did the just a little bit of reading, it's like, oh, well, that's why. And so yeah, now perfectly recognizable, but I didn't notice it at the time.
Yep, makes sense. And the
And I
bit of
saw, I was going to say, I saw you put the note in about the book, audiobook.
yeah, so it was a little bit different than when I first saw it, I just sort of glanced at it, and it's not that there's a book called it's an audiobook called Alien 3, and it's based on one of the scripts that was in development for the third movie in that franchise. And it's a script that never really saw the light of day, and it's an alternate story about what happens after the events of the second movie, Aliens. And he was a character in Aliens, and he reprises his role as I can't remember. I don't want to get his rank wrong. Um, I keep wanting to say he's a lieutenant, but he might be a corporal, and those are very different.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember what rank he held. I'd have to go back and look it up anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, uh, in that movie, most of the time he's going by his surname. So he reprises his role as Hicks from Aliens, and it's also got the actor that portrayed the character of Bishop, and it's the alternate. An alternate script that got made into an audiobook, and I believe it's only on Audible. So it is a dramatization of that script. And so that looks, I've been saving my, free Audible book for, I don't know how long have they been doing that. I was just like, I'm waiting for the right book, and I think this will be the one.
Yeah, I might actually do the same. Then again, I don't know when I would get a chance to listen to it. So
Right. But it's like it's one. It's so the sort of space marine story I've come really into. It's got a special place in my heart because I played the PC game Aliens versus Predator, and it's one of the best games I've ever played because you can be a space marine, you can be a xenomorph, or you can be a predator, and it's the same story told from all three of their perspectives. The least interesting is the xenomorph, from the perspective of the xenomorph. But if you get to be a space marine or a predator, such a cool game. It does not have Michael Biehn, but you can see the segue.
yeah, well, you win some, you lose some.
But the story is pretty well done. It's worth. I still have the disc. It's worth it's worth looking to see how easy it would be to emulate that and play it on a modern computer. Was there any more that you wanted to say about your ultra micro topic?
Well, I suppose we should at least provide a sample.
Okay.
Did you hear the drum roll?
I did not.
Oh. Well, I'll have to see if it made it into the recording. Obviously, I still have some tweaking to do to make all this work appropriately. That was it on it.
Okay.
Like either it makes its way in and you can hear it, or it doesn't. So I guess I could bump up the volume and see if it's just that. We'll try that real quick. Yeah, so I see that going into the recording. I don't see it going into the FaceTime audio stream.
Gotcha. Yeah, I did not hear it. Well, I thought go to my micro topic that from last week they got carried over to this week, and it was just a little thing I wanted to point out about how the video playback controls inside of Apple Photos on iOS is, I feel like, the worst interface for video playback controls. And maybe it's because they're intended for a different kind of use, but I just hate them. I wish my favorite video playback controls have been in the YouTube app. I love them because you tap the screen and everything is there, and you can play, you can pause, you can go back a few seconds, you can go forward a few seconds, you can skip to the next video. It would be like the same like track skipping button that you would see, but one of my favorite features is you can just double tap on the screen. On left of center will reverse however many seconds the default is. I think it's 10, and double tap on the right of center and it's forward 10 seconds. And I love that feature. It's such a cool feature, and I wish there were more apps that did that. The YouTube app is the only one that I know of. It's the only one that I use that has that. But I would even say that the video playback controls in Safari still better than the video playback controls in Apple Photos. And it's either they're just set up to do a certain thing that I just don't do, or what, I don't know.
Yeah, the only time I use any kind of control there is when I'm scrubbing the video. So for that, it works well. I don't know that I've ever tried to skip back or forward any certain amount of time.
Well, it's more than that, because when you go to play a video, it plays, and maybe there's a setting for this, I just haven't thought to go look, but it plays a video and you have to adjust the volume or tap to unmute the video when you first start playing it. And once you've done that, then I feel like I have to go backwards, because I've missed the first bit of video. And it's the scrubber instead of or it's a visual timeline that you use to scrub instead of just a white line that you move a dot along. And it just feels a bit clunky. I think the idea of using that scrubber for editing makes a lot of sense, but that should be reserved in an edit mode, because most of the time, the Photos app is for viewing and playback, and there is editing, but I really wish that they would change the controls so that there'd be that scrubber would come up in the editing mode rather than all the time.
I can see that. When I read the comment, it's what made me prompted me to put the other comment in about organization in general in the Photos app. Just feels horrid because there's not a. Well, I'll back up. It feels horrid on iOS. On the Mac, it works well because you have the screen real estate to be able to see the full list and not have to scroll through large thumbnails depicting whatever you have in either embedded in a folder or whatever number of albums you've created.
Yeah, it's certainly not ideal. It's not as big of a pain point for me, but I already live in a world where I have a better concept of this event happen this year at this month. I have a very good internal timeline. I think my experience has been better than most, and so I don't get that pain point as much, but I understand that I'm fairly unique in that regard. But I do hate the way recents work, because if you airdrop a photo or video, if you get an airdrop video or photo, it doesn't show up in recents, but it shows up in recents, but it doesn't show up based on its date. You actually have to go to the actual timeline for it to show up based on date correctly, and that just kind of drives me crazy. Plus, there's 20,000 photos in my over 21,000 photos in my recents. That's not recent. That's not recent.
No, I didn't have the pain point until I started looking at, with the increased storage capacity in iCloud, potentially moving some things, or not necessarily moving, but duplicating some things that I would want easier access to from Lightroom into Photos. Again, because it is strictly, for my use case, a viewing app anyway. And the problem is I can't emulate the structure I have in Lightroom in a way that makes it easy to navigate in Photos. I mean, I can create folders and drop a bunch of albums into those folders and make it better as far as the iOS experience, but that's not really what I want because it's not emulating the structure I have in Lightroom. Granted, if I could tag stuff in Photos, I could probably filter and do things that I would normally do in Lightroom a lot easier as well, but it's just two very different approaches to photo organization, and Lightroom is just drastically superior from a use perspective, but drastically inferior when it comes to having to pay for storage from Adobe instead of being able to leverage the iCloud storage I already pay for.
Right. That makes sense, and it's just they're trying to trap you in their ecosystem and extract as much money from you as possible. I mean, that's their job. So,
and I really just don't use Lightroom on mobile. I use it, for my primary library, and then if I'm needing to pull up something on mobile that I have not put in Photos, sure, I'll pull it up and I can show a synced thumbnail, but that's just not a compelling use case for me. So tell me about editing on an external hard drive.
Well, I have this big, it's funny. Right before Casey List talks about his woes with external storage and his Synology a few months ago, I decided I was going to stop using my Synology NAS because, I don't know, it just, the main use that I got it for is no longer needed. And I have a Mac Mini running doing server things and encoding, ripping and encoding and transcoding videos, and so it also serves up my Plex, and it's backed up to a time capsule that's on. And I like using the Ethernet backup via Ethernet, and it also has a license for Backblaze. So my whole strategy there is I've got everything on the internal hard drive. Everything on the internal hard drive of the Mac is also backed up by Backblaze and on my time capsule. And it turns out that it's a terabyte hard drive plus a 128 solid state, so it makes a fusion drive. Well, it's not enough to store everything that I have, because my video, I record lots and lots of videos, mostly of my children in the past 9 years at this point, almost 10 years, and so there just wasn't enough room that I felt comfortable leaving it there. There just wasn't any headroom. I probably could have gotten it all on that. I can't remember how big that is, but I also wanted to host, use Plex on that with that Mac Mini, and so I was like, I definitely didn't have enough room, and so I took everything that I had in Plex off of that and put it on about a 5 terabyte hard drive, put it on that, and also put my Final Cut Pro library on there, so that all of it would be backed up by Backblaze and had sufficient storage. And so I also thought, I could have put other things on that external drive instead of my Final Cut library, but I decided to do that because it was the single largest thing, and it also meant that if I was going to edit videos, I think it's a good idea to edit on a second drive and not edit on on your boot drive. I know that was a thing from a long time ago when you had spinning disks. I think there was an issue where if you didn't have a fast enough hard drive, you might miss a frame or whatever. I've never done editing to that level, but I was like, I want the convenience, so I can just unmount the drive, move it to my MacBook Pro and edit from there, and then move it back and so forth. So that was the idea, and I was just thinking about is that a thing now with hard drives? Do you need them to be on different drives? Maybe. I don't know. It's just the thing I was thinking of.
It depends a lot on the drives and what else you have going on and everything else. So back in the days I was dealing with predominantly with video, if I tried to edit on the primary boot drive, then I would have problems with frames dropping, and render times would be significantly slower. It just impacted performance of being able to manipulate media. And so at the time I was using a desktop with Adobe Premiere, so it was a Windows-based machine. I had a single drive as a boot drive, and then a RAID array actually striped for a scratch drive, basically. And that's where all of the video files were stored and everything else. With the change to fast SSD storage, if you're doing small enough projects, it really doesn't matter. Personally, I bought a 2 terabyte SSD that I put video on, as well as the Final Cut Pro library, and I still keep anything that I do play with video-wise on a separate drive from my boot volume.
It feels smart.
And I don't know how much of that is a holdover versus how much of it is just ease of dedicating that space to it.
Yeah, I've heard something. I'm sorry. I feel like I left something out completely, and that was that I mentioned Casey Liss at the beginning of that, and it was funny to me because when he was getting advice on his podcast, basically the advice was to do what I did, and I think he ended up doing that. So anyway, I was just like, it's gonna be the easiest thing. That's what you're gonna like. I just remember thinking that's the conclusion you're gonna come to, because it's the conclusion I came to, and if you don't, then you're obviously wrong. No, not obviously wrong. Anyway, I just Like that same holdover that you have, I feel like it's a good idea. But I also think about like at some point you can read and write enough to an SSD that it's going to give out. Like it's going to stop working. And it's not done in the same way as rotational hard drives, but it will eventually stop working. And I'm wondering if you're like how much read and write room do those SSDs have?
I would expect you probably would not have issues over the average lifespan of a computer as a normal end user unless you were really focused on doing video projects constantly.
That's what I think.
That said, though, if you start dealing with longer clips or putting together longer content, to me it just makes sense to keep it on a separate drive or a separate array, just depending on what you have access to, predominantly because it increases performance without having to deal with the overhead of the OS running on the same drive to an extent.
Yeah. I kind of, it's a thing of the past. There's this brief window of time where Fusion drives was a technology, software technology that Apple was leveraging for, mixed environments of SSDs and rotational hard drives. And I'm thinking like it's a good, I think about this more in terms of video transcoding, and that it's kind of nice to do video transcoding on a Fusion drive because all of the OS is running on one drive and all of the videos are being created on that rotational drive because it's, it hasn't existed on the drive long enough access enough for it to go on the SSD. So at least my understanding of how Fusion drives work, that's what's happening, and that seems advantageous.
The logic, it seems sound. I never bought into the Fusion drive concept. I went straight from rotational drives to SSDs, so I don't have any direct experience with it.
Yeah, I've done all sorts of business with all sorts of interesting things with Fusion drives. It's even so much so that there are versions of Mac OS or at the time OS 10, that don't support creating new Fusion drives. Like I remember having to, I think it might have been Yosemite or LCAP that Yosemite supported it. Maybe it was LCAP that didn't. I don't recall, but I remember having to boot into Mavericks to create the Fusion drive and then install, created the Fusion drive in a Mavericks installer, and then I booted the actual installer one, and it must have been LCAP, maybe even Sierra, because it wasn't possible. You couldn't do it in whatever the most current version of OS 10, and I thought that was really interesting. So it was like some of the commands to create Fusion drives were abandoned in OSs, so or newer releases. So it was a very short-lived thing, but it was really nice to be able to do that. I think my favorite one to do that in was the first Mac Mini I had. It was a 2011 Mac Mini. I bought a data doubler from OWC, stuck in the ribbon cable, and a SATA SSD from Crucial. It was glorious to be able to spend so little money and have SSD speeds and lots of storage.
Was there anything else specific to editing, or should we move into the primary topic for the evening?
I think we should go to the primary topic, and it's time.
We can summarize it pretty easily. Michael Keaton is the best Batman. The end. No, we have a bunch of notes. I probably won't reference them since I think most of them were yours anyway. I'm just going to go off the cuff. But I will say that Michael Keaton is by far my favorite actor to portray Batman.
Yeah, it's comparing apples and oranges. The argument I like to put up there. It's very much I just want to yank your chain, but Kevin Conroy is a voice actor, so by any, as far as like portrayal, it's an apples and oranges comparison. And that being the case, Michael Keaton is my first and second favorite Batman.
So I will give credit when you talk about iconic roles. Conway does create a very iconic Batman, or helps to create a very iconic Batman. I know to this day the animated series still is often looked to as the best portrayal on the screen of the idea of Batman from the comics. And, of course, Conway is who brought that to life. The argument... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I know you put this in the notes, it wasn't just Conway. Mark Hamill did an amazing job as Joker.
Correct. The point that I was just going to kind of emphasize is that when we're talking about actors who have portrayed Batman, my criteria tends to be when you see the actor portraying them, not an animated variant where an actor is lending their voice. And it's not that there's anything against that profession or that portrayal. It's that what you see is not indicative of what the actor is bringing. The actor is bringing the emotion and the voice, but what you see is what an illustrator is bringing to the table. Whereas when you have a live-action variant and you have that actor portraying the character, it's a combination of what they bring for the visual appearance and portrayal and body language and everything else, and the voice. And that's the only reason I make that distinction.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair distinction, because the only physicality a voice actor can bring is through his voice, and so there's a lot of a good voice actor is going to bring some physicality into the audio and emotion into the audio, but it's not the same. Like I said, it's comparing apples and oranges. It's not a fair comparison. I just wanted to yank your chain.
With all that said, I did like Christian Bale's portrayal of Batman and Bruce Wayne. The only knock that I had against his, I just can't stand that gravelly voice.
That's the exact same thing I was gonna say. It's the voice that he did made me feel like he was just trying to like make that Snickers commercial. Like, I couldn't not think about that Snickers commercial. I don't know. Do you recall there was a Super Bowl commercial where some guy had to do. It was a Snickers commercial. I don't even remember why, but some guy gets knocked out and he wakes up and he's like, "I'm Batman." And that's really, I didn't think about Christian Bale being like Batman and trying to be intimidating. All I could think about with that was that Snickers commercial. But when Michael Keaton did it, it was different. I mean, it came, the Snickers parody was based on Michael Keaton, but when he did it in the 1989 movie, it was brand new. None of us had really ever seen Batman portrayed that way before.
Right, and I think the big thing is that he didn't get quite so gurgly, for lack of a better word. Like there's a certain overemphasis that Bale provided that Keaton did not, and I think it works better the way Keaton portrayed it than the way Bale portrayed it.
I agree. It was too Bell's gravelly voice was too forced.
Right, and actually, that may be the better keyword to pick up on is it just felt forced. Keaton's did not feel forced to me. It just felt like he was masking his voice for the sake of portraying Batman, which you would expect.
He was very much in character. like Bruce Wayne in the character of Batman, or Bruce Wayne as the persona of Batman, I should say.
Right. And what I really loved about Keaton's portrayal is the quirkiness that he gave to Bruce Wayne. And how recently have you watched the original Batman? Or I guess it's not the original, the 1989 Batman.
I watched it just a few weeks ago.
So the interesting thing I guess there will be spoilers for any and all Batman-related material, so let's just get that out of the way.
It's 30 years old.
Still, you gave me grief about a couple of others. I'm going to go ahead and at least put the disclaimer out there. But when Vicky Vale and the photographer make their way into the party, and Kim Basinger's Vicky Vale walks up to Michael Keaton and asks about which one of these people is Bruce Wayne, and he just says, "I don't know."
Yeah.
That quirkiness was present throughout the film, and it was somewhat unique for anything I had seen as far as the way Bruce Wayne had been portrayed, but it felt absolutely on point with the difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman, because it made it feel like Batman was the actual person, and when he was having to hide his identity, he was playing Bruce Wayne. And that's a big distinction for how you think of Batman as a character. Because if you pick one, like, is it Bruce Wayne playing Batman or is it Batman playing Bruce Wayne? The latter is more intriguing and I think more indicative of the character itself, the way it was portrayed both in the comics, even in the animated series, and then finally brought to screen in that way, where I never got that feeling from like the Batman TV show or any other iteration of Batman previously.
Well, I think so. The Batman TV show is like what I grew up with, and it was very kid friendly. It was safe. It was came out in the mid '60s. It culminated in I know it was a TV show before it was a movie, and then there was a movie sometime during the run of the TV show, but I think the TV show continued after that movie. And it was very much a portrayal of what you saw in the comics, because the comics were bright and colorful. They weren't dark and gritty like they would be today, but the content was a lot more dark and gritty than the TV show would lead you to believe. And so it was just a very family-friendly TV show. Adam West portrays Batman, and he's very much Adam West through the whole thing. Like, there's more Adam West than there is Batman or Bruce Wayne in that show. And I think I made a note about Burt Ward being the same way. I saw an interview with Burt Ward from around 2001, and he's just like really, he's either like, sorry, the actor that portrays Burt Ward is either in character or seems like a really naive person in real life. Whereas like Adam West had a big chip on his shoulder because he didn't get any royalties for the show. So he's just, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of Adam West in that show rather than a portrayal of Bruce Wayne or Batman.
I think that's a fair enough observation, because if you go back to the comics, you probably would have to wait until Frank Miller got a hold of Batman to actually see a grittier and darker portrayal in print. Much like on the Marvel side, Captain America and Iron Man were always very colorful and very bright, even though the topics that they talked around were not as friendly as the comics were illustrated. There was a disconnect there. So Batman was very similar as far as the comics being very bright and friendly in appearance, and you could read them in a fashion that didn't delve into the underlying topics with any detail. Like, you could read them just for the enjoyment of reading them, and if you took the time to think about them, then you could see some of these underpinnings of darker storylines, so to speak. And then Frank Miller came along and gave us the very gritty, very dark Knight that the Christian Bale films brought to the screen. Or I guess it's Christopher Columbus. No, Christopher Nolan. Sorry, Christopher Nolan.
Very different Christophers.
Yes. I just had the wrong name on mine because I had recently paid attention to the credits on another film.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, if you want Batman to look like Christmas, get Christopher Columbus to direct it.
Yeah. And I guess for clarification, anybody who's not familiar with the name Frank Miller, if you've ever seen Sin City, that is the perfect illustration on screen of the way Frank Miller tells a story in print. Like the films really captured the way he chooses to illustrate and tell a story in the print world, and they were great from that standpoint. That said, though, I think Nolan's interpretation really hit appropriately, especially when you think about the second film. The Dark Knight. You had Dark Knight, and then Dark Knight Rises was the third with Biehn. So yeah, you had Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight really embodied that gritty, dangerous idea of what Frank Miller brought to Batman. And then I'm not going to knock anybody else. I know other people have followed it up. That was just the last time I paid attention to the comics.
Yeah. I never really read any Batman comics to any extent to speak about them with any good working knowledge, other than I knew that they were grittier than the 60s TV show would have you believe. But I do remember. So I remember when Batman came out, it was a pop culture phenomenon. When Tim Burton's Batman came out in 1989, I was about 8 years old, and I remember so very much wanting to go to see that movie. I was so interested, and I just remember my mom just like, that is not Batman, because she grew up in the 60s. She was a kid in the 60s, and it was very much not something, to see Batman in an all-black suit was very much not something that she was ready for. And I just remember her saying something to the effect of how, they've ruined Batman. And it's funny to think about that now, because it's like, really, it's the other way around. The 60s TV show did not portray Batman the way the source material according to the source material. So I remember that being funny, and I remember I really loved the way Tim Burton put together that movie and the look of it. I think he made Gotham City look the way Gotham City looks, and for a long time. And a lot of the cues that the animators for Batman the Animated Series took were from Tim Burton's Batman, because that came out the same year Batman Returns came out. But I feel like that 1989 movie is fairly well dated, and it holds up pretty well, but it's dated.
Yeah, some of the effects, I think, are the biggest things that make it difficult to rewatch, because you can take a lot of the attire and a lot of the other things and suspend disbelief, because it is a comic adaptation, and so you expect the world to look or feel different in general. I think the only place for me that it starts to kind of show some cracks are the special effects themselves.
Yeah, I think the story is good. Definitely the acting is good. I mean,
we would be remiss in not going ahead and interjecting and mentioning Jack Nicholson making the Joker be scary in a way that no one had portrayed previously.
He paved the way for some of the best Joker portrayals that are out there.
Absolutely. I remember reading an interview that Heath Ledger provided before his passing, talking about wanting to pay homage to the kind of groundbreaking way Nicholson brought the Joker to the screen, but he didn't want to try to emulate it. He wanted to have his own take on it and bring it to life in a way that was fitting the story that was being told. But there was obviously an influence there as well.
Yeah, I think so. I put in the notes something that you could maybe say a direct correlation, and it may have just been the writing, but there were, each of those Jokers had a catch or had a phrase. Jack Nicholson's Joker has "Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight?" And which is an interesting phrase, and he goes into why he says it. He just finds it interesting. It doesn't really have a lot of meaning, and he's just kind of like a thing he would say. And Heath Ledger's Joker has the line, "Do you want to know how I got these scars?" And I think that one's actually really interesting because you don't actually ever find out if he's telling the truth about how he got the scars, because he tells at least 2 stories about the scars. But it really plays into the sort of psychological issues that Joker has. Like Jack Nicholson's Joker, he seems like, you got a bad guy, you got a gangster, part of organized crime, something terrible happens to him by falling into the acid or whatever chemicals that he fell into in the Axis chemical plant. And now he's just kind of like a screw's gone loose. He was already a bad dude, but now he's just a fucked up bad dude. But Heath Ledger's portrayal of Joker is way, it's a lot darker, because whatever got to him early, and it got to him in a way that he became a bad guy because of whatever psychological issues affected him. And whereas I feel like Jack Napier, the Joker from the 89 movie, he was bad and then got crazy because something bad, something traumatic happened to him.
Yeah, I really loved the way the Heath Ledger Joker was portrayed as just an agent of chaos. That at the culmination of his ideals or lens through which he viewed things, it was that chaos was entertaining and made sense. And to me, that was always the way the concept of the Joker was probably born and fleshed out, but wasn't explained as succinctly in previous iterations. And I think that's one of the areas that Mark Hamill actually brought some of that to the table in the animated series with his mannerisms and just the way he acted the character or voiced the character. Because for him, entertainment was of utmost value. He didn't care about the specifics of what a particular act meant. He cared about the outcome being something that could go whatever direction. Maybe a better way to phrase it is actually if you think back to Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker and look at his interaction with Harvey Dent in the hospital, where he could care less about the outcome. He just flips a coin because it's entertaining, and whatever the outcome, it's going to make the next choice very spur of the moment and not necessarily emotional, even though obviously emotions were heightened, but just that it was unknown, and the unknown is what he fed on. I don't feel like that was a very succinct way to describe it, but it's an agent of chaos, the idea of chaos being entertaining. Those are the two key takeaways.
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly confirm. I feel like I couldn't confirm this, but I thought that in my head I thought Jack Nicholson had been nominated for an Oscar for his portrayal of Joker. Did I make that up, or did somebody make that up and that get in my head?
I don't remember hearing that. It might have been. I know that Heath Ledger was nominated.
He won. He won Best Supporting Actor.
I couldn't remember for sure if he won it or not, but I knew it was posthumously nominated.
Yeah. So I had this. So there's like a really interesting progression of actors that play Joker and actors who portray Joker in a very good way, and that is that like I can't confirm this, but I felt like I know that I'd heard that Jack Nicholson was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Joker in the '89 Batman, but I haven't never actually confirmed that. But Heath Ledger won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Joker, and then rightfully so, Joaquin Phoenix won an Academy Award for Best Actor. Like I think it's the first time a comic book character has, or a character from a comic book, a portrayal of a character from a comic book has won Best Actor. And so I just thought it's really interesting to see, like, there's something so interesting about this character that very good actors are portraying him in such a way that they're getting awarded for it. And there's something interesting about it. And I think, so I watched the Joker movie over the weekend, and I remember when it came out, and I remember thinking, oh, that looks like a good movie, and I remember hearing like good reviews about it. But when I actually, it surprised me how good that movie was.
Full disclosure, I still haven't watched it.
Oh my God, it is so good. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. It is definitely the best portrayal of Joker. It's done in a really interesting way. I know that the director has said that like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker will never appear in any of the other sort of DC movies, but it was done in an interesting way because it certainly fits in. It certainly exists as a part of the Batman story. But it's moving, and I know they didn't. The movie makers didn't set out to make a social commentary, but I mean, there's nothing but social commentary in that movie, and it might be just because like when you make something good, it does reflect upon the nature of what it is. I guess the nature of its surrounding, but it's so good. You could really sum up without giving away too much. You could really sum up that movie where Joker was a mistreated person with somewhat severe mental illness that was just looking to connect with people in society, and he turned out to become a symbol rather than actually finding fulfillment. So it's definitely worth a watch. I'd watch it. I'd put it at the top of your list.
Yeah, it's been one that I keep almost starting and then realize, what time it is in the evening and realize there's no way I'm going to be able to finish it before I just am so tired I have to go to sleep. And for some reason, it's another one of those that I can't bring myself to start and then pause. And it may be that it lends itself to it without a problem, and I could do it with, no issues. But for some reason or another, it's one that I have in my head that no, when I start it, I need to finish it as well in one continuous viewing.
So it's probably the grittiest movie in the Batman universe that I've seen. I didn't see like the Batman and Superman one. I didn't see the Suicide Squad movie, but I do want to see the Suicide Squad movie.
It's okay.
Yeah, and that's why I haven't seen the other Batman movies. And it's definitely the darkest Joker I've seen, because so when I watched that movie, at the beginning, I mean, I know who Joker is. I know where it's going. But at the beginning of that movie, I felt compassion and pity for Joker.
Well, from everything I know about the premise of the film, that's part of how it is designed, right? Like you're supposed to fall in love with the character is the incorrect phrasing, but you're supposed to be able to empathize with Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of the character and then see his evolution into the role of the Joker that we know. Or maybe not even that we know, but the role of the Joker as a whole. And that's not a story that we have actually been privy to. The closest I can think of is the Jack Nicholson portrayal, and it's really not an origin story. It's here's this guy, this thing happens, and then we're going to kind of pick up on him being this character from this point forward.
Right. Like where you see like with, so I think it's interesting because these are the only two Joker portrayals that they've been given, they're given names. And, you've got in the 89 movie, you've got Jack Napier, and you see how he goes from being a bad guy to being the Joker, a supervillain. Whereas in Joker, the character's Arthur Fletch. That's the Joker's name, and you see him go from being just a person, a man, to a supervillain, and it's a compelling story. But it's nice because it all fits in, like everything. They did a really good job of making it seem like it wasn't in a superhero universe. It really could have been just a movie without having anything to do with superheroes and supervillains. It could have just been a story about how this guy Arthur Fletch goes from being a down and out guy to being like a bad guy, just someone who did some, ran out of, snapped. That's the word I'm looking for. He snapped and just started doing some bad things. So, I think, it being the origin, an origin story for Joker makes it more compelling, but it would have worked. It would have worked just as well if it had not been a movie about a character that we know. And they did a really good job. I think they did a really good job of fitting certain things in that we know and that have become iconic in Batman lore, and just did a really good job of making you remember. It's like, oh yeah, this is still like part of the Batman story.
So would you class it, or maybe in summary, would you say that it's a compelling story of how a man struggles with mental illness and devolves into sociopathy. Sociopathy.
Sociopathy, psychopathy. Yeah.
Which could also correlate to a person pursuing political power that devolves into. Never mind. I had to at least mention it because it just was a fun segue. But no, so one of the things that I always found interesting about the Joker film was, from a behavioral science standpoint, it seemed to tell a story of exactly that, of a guy that started out with a troubled past and battled mental illness, and then devolved into more of a sociopathic state. And so I've wanted to see it ever since I saw the trailer. It just has, again, been one of those things where, knowing the way I approach certain movies, I just didn't feel like I could give it justice if I couldn't watch it in one continuous sitting. That being said, if it is something that after seeing it you could say, yeah, there's a pretty compelling break point where you could pause and then resume without feeling that you interrupted necessarily, then I can move it up the list pretty quickly. If not, it's probably still going to be, I don't know, a couple of weeks or so before I get a chance to actually sit down and watch it.
I think it's one of those movies where you just won't want to stop it. Like it's like you're gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna be tired tomorrow, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think the big drawback there is that as I've gotten older, I can only stand one or two of those nights a week.
Right. The other thing I was going to say about it is that they did a good job letting you, I think, portraying the state of mental illness, at least in this country. I think that they weren't, the movie makers say they weren't, the writer director saying he wasn't, this was not a social commentary so much as a reflection of the way our society is, which it's a subtle distinction, but I can't not get social commentary in there. That might just be because, like I'm looking at it with certain eyes, but it was eye-opening in a way. Like, it's like I knew these things, but now they've been personified in a way that really hit home, and I really liked it. And I remember one of the I believe it was a psychologist that was, I guess, a subject matter expert for the movie makers, now uses the movie in his class. Like, it's in his, he teaches in a university, and he uses it in his class because it was such a good portrayal.
So it's a little bit of a deviation from the subject, but if you were to rank portrayals of the Joker, just top we'll say in order of 1 to 4, just so that you have to think about it a little bit, how would you rank those? And then we'll do the same thing for Batman.
So are we talking about like portrayal of, like, based on
whatever subjective criteria that you want to use to rank them from best portrayal to further down the list?
Okay. I'm going to leave out the animated portrayals because, again, like I said, apples and oranges. Michael Keaton would be, I think, the best portrayal of Batman.
Well, let's start with Joker, since that's the topic that we were on.
You can fix that in post.
Well, I also don't mind leaving it. Like, it's normal conversation. Why not?
Yeah. So I think so it's really hard because.
Well, I think that's why it's the more interesting question, because it's a lot more difficult because the portrayals have been so different, both from an origin perspective and from a what do we want to portray perspective. So you really have a range of very, very different characters portraying the same idea of a singular character. Whereas even though you had different portrayals of Batman, they were still portraying the same general idea. And we have not had that uniformity with the Joker, which is why I wanted to start with that one.
Yeah, I think that Heath Ledger's is the best Joker because you can see, like at that point he's fully psychotic, but you see the pain in him. You see that he's got issues, and it doesn't feel like he's in the driver's seat, but it doesn't feel like he's quite in control. The Joaquin Phoenix Joker is just so different. That movie is just so different because it's not an in-your-face Batman movie. It's not even an in-your-face superhero movie. It's set in the early 80s, which was really interesting, especially because Gotham City is New York City, and they portray an early 80s New York City, which was a dirty, gritty city. And it just, I don't know, it's just hard to fit that in because it is so different. But I think like his was like the second best Joker because he's that, what we have come to know to be the Joker is towards the end of that movie. And then it feels really bad to give Jack Nicholson a bronze medal for his portrayal of Joker, but he paved the way for actors to do a better and better job.
I think that's fair. I think if you look at Nicholson's portrayal, it was very much an attempt to bring the idea of the comic book villain to life, with it being somewhat over the top and not campy necessarily, but definitely not from a realist perspective, I guess, or a kind of rooted in reality grittiness. It was more of a comic grittiness for the time, I'm obviously struggling a bit for the correct words, but the idea is just
caricature.
That, yes, it was very, very stylized and very over the top because it fit the film and it was new and a way to really push this character up into your face without taking away from the overall idea of it being a Batman movie. Like it was, to me, it was as far as he could push the character without stealing the show.
Yeah, I mean, it was leaps and bounds over Cesar Romero from the 60s Batman. I mean, that guy wouldn't even shave his mustache for the character. If you watch any of the old Batman movies with the Joker, they painted his mustache white because he wouldn't shave it. He refused to shave it. So, one of the things that I find really interesting about Nicholson's Joker is that he's the only Joker that he puts makeup on to make himself look Caucasian. The rest of the Jokers put makeup on to look like clowns.
Yeah, it is an interesting kind of side piece because you don't see it that often. I think there were two scenes that come to mind at least. One, the impersonation of a police officer or trying to fit in as a police officer for the assassination attempt, and then attempting to woo Vicky Vale in it was a museum, I think, right, where they had a diner or something.
Yep. There's one more.
the origin was different, right? That's the only variant that I'm aware of where, other than in the comic material itself, it's the only variant we've had on screen where the origin is falling into a vat of some liquid that leaves him disfigured. And part of why I think Heath Ledger's Joker is so fascinating is that the makeup is a reflection of how he views the world around him. And I guess you could actually make the same argument with Nicholson's portrayal, that in order to fit in with the world around him, he's applying that makeup. But in Ledger's case, it felt more like it was a big FU to everything around, and more a matter of attempting to sow confusion and some element of chaos into everything, which included physical appearance. And that may be overreading it a bit, but it also goes back to, with Ledger's Joker, we never know anything about the origin. We only know from the point that he arrived on scene. And so you get the combination of the "do you want to know how I got these scars?" The catchphrase, and the idea that he was disfigured, and so he emphasizes the disfigurement by making himself look out of place or different, and embracing it wholeheartedly as an additional method of chaoticness, I guess, in everything around him.
Yeah, I think you could compare the two and say Nicholson's Joker had becoming the Joker happen to him, where Ledger's Joker was like, it wasn't something that happened to him. It came from within versus coming, Nicholson's Joker, it was an external force that happened, and Ledger's Joker was an internal transformation. And I think that made Ledger's Joker at least more scary, because you didn't know what was real or that any of it was real. All you knew was what was happening in that moment. And he could have done it. He could have made those scars himself, or the lacerations that made those scars himself. You just don't know.
It definitely felt more visceral.
Yes.
More like this was something that you might actually encounter if you encountered a psychopath that had the ability to evade. Capture is not the right word, because it's not so much evading capture. A psychopath that was able to run rampant in an area just because of circumstance. So I guess we actually could back up slightly. Psychopathy is more of a legal definition than it is a mental state. Sociopathy is the actual recognized lack of empathy and understanding of emotional response in other people. Actually, I take that back. I need to correct myself already.
Okay.
Psychopathy is an issue within brain chemistry nullifying the emotional response. Sociopathy is not being able to understand and recognize and process the emotional response. What I was thinking of with the legal definition is insanity. Insanity is a purely legal construct. And we interweave those so often in portrayals on film, mostly because it doesn't matter, right? The idea is that they're manifesting themselves in the same general way. But with Ledger's Joker, part of what makes it confusing is that you really get a sense of insanity of action, where anything is whimsical and it's just based on the immediate feeling or whatever is feeding the thought process, but with the calculated intelligence of a genius, really. And that's what makes it feel so scary.
Yeah. I mean, he was super clever. I enjoyed how that character, like his plans and how things worked out, it was a clever movie. So, yeah.
I certainly would rank Ledger's Joker as my number one as well. Since I have not seen Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal, I can't weigh in on that one, which leaves Nicholson in the number 2 spot for me so far.
What about Jared Leto in Suicide Squad?
I'm just not a fan of Leto's portrayal. It is interesting. Did you ever watch the Justice League?
The cartoon?
No,
in the 80s?
The film adaptation.
No.
Okay.
No.
So, backstory. Originally, Zack Snyder was the director signed on for the Justice League film. He was replaced by Joss Whedon. The film really just is not good. There has been recent news where Zack Snyder's version of the Joker with Jared Leto harkens back more toward Heath Ledger's portrayal instead of the overly tattooed, short hair, kind of comical portrayal that we saw in Suicide Squad. All of that's everything that I've seen there is extremely recent, and I don't know all the details. But it's one of those things where there's a chance the Joker's portrayal under Zack Snyder's stewardship, when the alternate or original or director's cut or release, or however you want to phrase whatever bastardization we've gotten ourselves into with that film, whenever that variant is released, there's a chance his portrayal will be much better. But I was not at all impressed with his portrayal in Suicide Squad.
See, I got interested in Suicide Squad because of, well, really it was Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. But also I thought like it was a very interesting new look for Joker, and I was somewhat interested in it. But then it just never, there were never really any, strong recommendations to see it. So it just lost, anything that was compelling about it was sort of lost on me. But,
yeah, I've tried to watch it a couple of times. It just doesn't hold my interest well enough to stay awake the entire film. And I haven't felt compelled to go back and actually piece together anything that I've missed, because none of it makes me want to revisit it. And it's not that it was necessarily horrible, it's just there was nothing memorable or compelling about what I saw of it.
Something interesting to me that it's been, like, the Riddler has been absent from any Batman movie in the 21st century that I know about, and I find that kind of interesting.
The last portrayal that I can think of was Jim Carrey's iteration.
Yeah, that was a while ago. It was 95.
I think he was a good choice for it. I just think I think the film as a whole was a letdown, and as a result, his portrayal is just kind of forgotten and by the wayside.
Yeah, so I had some notes about that. I didn't hate Joel Schumacher because he directed Batman Forever, and he directed Batman and Robin, and he's been credited with the director that killed Batman because those people hate both of those movies. He went back to a more colorful, I feel like whimsical is the wrong word, because whimsical, there's a positive connotation to it. But it's definitely a reversal of the darkness that Tim Burton brought to the character. But Tim Burton dark is different than a gritty dark. But I didn't hate those movies. Well, I hated Batman and Robin, but I didn't hate Batman Forever. Batman Forever was fun. It had a cool Robin origin story. Val Kilmer was a terrible Bruce Wayne. He was a terrible Batman, but the villains in that movie were great. Tommy Lee Jones. Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones was a hilarious Harvey Dent / Two-Face. You never actually see him as Harvey Dent. He's Two-Face throughout the whole movie. And Jim Carrey was a fun Riddler. He did a great job in that role. It was a lot of fun. He was very Jim Carrey though. So
yeah, I certainly have no affinity for either Batman Forever or Batman and Robin, but of the two, I have no problems at least acknowledging Batman Forever exists.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I do, however, have some problems acknowledging Batman and Robin exists. Not to the same extent that I refuse to acknowledge that other movie that shall go unnamed.
I know the one.
But it's... And I think the only reason is because I thought Clooney was an interesting choice to play Batman and Batman and Robin. And I think he pulled off Bruce Wayne relatively well. I couldn't buy him as Batman.
Yeah, and he had done, he'd played a pretty dark character before. Well, I don't know if he was that dark. He played a bad guy in From Dusk Till Dawn, more or less. And that was the year before, or a couple of years before, Batman and Robin. So, I don't know. He was, I guess, at that point in time, you saw too much of his character from ER. Like, I'd never seen ER, but I know he's in ER, and he was a doctor in ER. And at that time, I would just, here's the doctor from ER as Batman. But yeah, I think it's Bruce Wayne. I don't know. I think he could be a really great Batman, but the time has passed.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his filmography as a whole, I mean, he certainly has the ability to play a range and can definitely pull it off with the correct guidance and supporting script and everything else. You just look at the more, I don't know if gritty is the right word, but the different ways he has portrayed characters when you look at something like Three Kings or Peacemaker or Ocean's 11. There's a huge range there. And those are just a handful of examples from his full filmography. So just as an actor, I would say he could absolutely pull it off. It just didn't work at the time for me. And I don't know how much of that is because he's no Michael Keaton when it comes to portraying Batman and Bruce Wayne, and he didn't try to be, but it just didn't work. And if I'd been introduced to Batman in a different way, maybe I wouldn't have such a strong feeling about that as I do having been introduced to Keaton's Batman first. But it certainly colors my perspective on Clooney's ability to portray him.
Yeah, with the right direction and the right tone for the movie with the right tone, he'd be up there. He could, as an actor, he had the ability to be up there as one of the best Batman portrayals. But that's not the movie he signed on for with the director he signed up with. So it's.
Yeah, the biggest thing that escapes me to this day is how anyone could cast Val Kilmer in the role.
Val Kilmer he's also a good actor. But
I agree, but there's nothing about Bruce Wayne or Batman that to me says, oh yes, Val Kilmer fits that role.
He's too much of a smartass to be a Bruce Wayne or a Batman.
Well, it's and I think part of it is he's too much of a, I hate using the phrasing, but too much of a pretty boy to sell Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, he is as much a Bruce Wayne or Batman as Johnny Depp would be a Bruce Wayne or Batman.
That's a fairly apt comparison, I think.
Yeah. Like, Johnny Depp made a great Jack Sparrow. But he would never make a good Batman.
That could open the door to some interesting things. Like, I can never see Tom Cruise capable of playing a Batman-esque role.
Yeah, neither. Like, he's another really same. Matthew McConaughey couldn't be a Batman, but he does so well in so many. I mean, like, I wanted to say Matthew McConaughey because he's an actor that like, I've seen him in various roles, and he's very Matthew McConaughey in all of those roles. And we talked about this last week, but he's still, like, I can forget that he's Matthew McConaughey.
Robert Downey Jr. And the reason I had to bring him up is because there's a very long comparison between Marvel and DC on this particular type of character, right?
Yeah.
Iron Man is the Batman of the Marvel universe,
right,
in many regards. And so someone who can pull off Iron Man flawlessly, I could never buy him as Batman.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's because Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne are very different billionaires.
Well, absolutely, but I think it just felt like a great thing to add to this particular episode.
Oh yeah, no, and it's funny because, like, when my kids, like, were like 5-ish years old, they knew who Tony Stark was. They knew that Tony Stark was Batman. I mean, sorry, they knew Tony Stark was Iron Man. Whereas I didn't know Tony Stark was even a character until I was 26 years old and watching Iron Man in the theater. Like, I didn't know. I mean, I knew Iron Man was a Marvel character, but I had no idea who Tony Stark was. Like, didn't even know Tony Stark existed. And my kids knew who Tony Stark was. Like, I knew who Bruce Wayne was when I was a kid. And it was sometime later, it was like years later, that my kids, it was funny. I just remembered this. I was like, who's Tony Stark? Iron Man. Who's Bruce Wayne? Bruce who? So, credit to Marvel for, like, taking over the minds of children, like the mind space of children. But yeah, I had no idea.
Well, it also has to reflect a bit on a lack of guidance from the parenting perspective, doesn't it?
Well,
I had to inject it. Obviously, I mean, Jacob's 5. He doesn't know anything about Iron Man or Batman yet. Well, I take that back. He knows something about Batman because he has an action figure Batman with a Batmobile that shoots projectiles.
Yeah,
but that's the extent of what he knows.
Yeah. But I mean, like, back, when you and I were Jacob's age, there was the 60s Batman TV show, and there was the Justice League, which was an animated cartoon in the early to mid 80s.
Yeah, from a screen perspective, DC Comics had everything. Like, the only thing I remember from Marvel was the old Captain America that was just so horribly campy, and then the Incredible Hulk TV series, which I actually did enjoy that one, but it still it was no Batman. Batman was superior at the time for me, which is actually kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, Batman and Superman, they were all I really knew about as far as comics. And I think maybe when I was in 4th grade, I found a collection of old Captain America. Like it was like a hardback book of the comics put together for Captain America comics put together in a single volume. I mean, it wasn't thick, but it was more than one comic. It was pretty cool, and I thought, thought it was interesting because he was fighting the Nazis.
So I remember, I never put together the idea of any of the handful of things that were on screen. The aforementioned Incredible Hulk show, the Batman show, etc. I never actually correlated those to comics growing up.
Right. Neither did I.
I don't remember the years. It had to be early 90s when I actually discovered comics from going to the supermarket at the time and being able to, just go hang out, buy the magazines and everything while my mom would get groceries. And there was one of the circular stands that you could rotate around that held comics. And I remember my first introduction to them was actually the G.I. Joe comics because it caught my eye after being a fan of the cartoon. And then the first other comics that I got into were the reboot of the X-Men when I think it was early 90s, when you had a more modern styling on the uniforms and everything else. And it was two different teams of X-Men that you could follow independently and that with some crossovers and everything else. Like, that was my actual introduction into comics as comics. And then I started to explore comics as a whole and realized the relation between comic books and some of the things that had been adapted for the screen. And I still didn't read most comics, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, I kind of wasn't allowed to read comics, or, it's like...
Yeah, I just remember being drawn to Wolverine and Psylocke from the X-Men, and anything I could find that had them crossing over in the story, or the characters that were introduced by way of them, I ended up exploring a bit further. And so that's how I also learned about X-Force and X-Factor, and one of my favorite comic heroes is Deadpool, Wade Wilson, which has finally been brought to the screen in a nice positive way by Ryan Reynolds, and I guess I shouldn't necessarily say a nice positive way, in a way befitting the character, and
certainly not his first portrayal of Deadpool.
No, not at all, and the other one we won't speak of.
Yeah.
But it's funny how that world still always felt different up until the recent Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It did. It felt like I felt like an outsider when I knew that these were comics. Like for me, like the first one was the animated X-Men from the early 90s. I think it was called the Uncanny X-Men. And
I think so. It's part of why I paused when I was thinking about the titles, because I can't remember if the comic was just called X-Men when they rebooted it, and the Uncanny X-Men was prior, or if I was thinking of the animated show. But I think you're correct. I think the animated show was called the Uncanny X-Men.
I thought that, and I think the Uncanny. I did a quick look. The Uncanny X-Men was the comic, and the animated show was X-Men, the animated series. And it came out the same year as Batman, the animated series.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I knew it was early 90s, but I didn't realize it was the same year. And I remember, I loved that. And it was I feel like that was the first real, comic book sort of exposure to that world of comic books. Like I had some Heathcliff comics just for fun, like that you get when you're a kid, and I think I'd seen some Archie comics and so forth, but this was like the first gritty comic that I'd seen. I'd never seen any of the Batman or Superman comics, and I remember a friend of mine showing me something from the X-Men comics from the early 90s, and it was graphic, and I thought it was really cool. I was really into it, but my parents, they weren't into me being into it, and I didn't push for it. So
yeah, I think if my parents had actually taken the time to pay attention to the content of the comics, they may not have been as allowing of me being into it at the time. But I also, like, I don't recall really leaving them around. Like, I would read through them and then just put them away. And I think without the reminder of these things being present, it just never really kind of dawned on them to look closer. It also, I was fairly advanced, shall we say, as far as reading goes. And so I would read all sorts of stuff anyway. And I think they probably just kind of lumped it into, well, you probably already read worse stories, actually, with all the time spent at like the library with completely free access to anything and everything.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just, I feel
actually,
like,
just thinking about it, it's actually semi-irresponsible how much time I've spent unsupervised at the library.
It's the library though, and if you're gonna be exposed to more adult related material, the library is the best place to be exposed to it.
Well, and it's kind of misleading the way that I phrase that as well. So where I grew up, the librarian at the public library in the city was a good close friend of the family as well, and her son was actually born the day after me. So our families knew each other well. We kind of grew up playing together in general. So after school, it was certainly no big deal for me to go spend time at the library. I was supervised by a friend of the family's parent. Just happened to also be at the library and giving me free access to whatever I could imagine material-wise. And so I joke a little bit about it being irresponsible, but it's only irresponsible in hindsight for what I could have access to, not from the idea of me going to no different than me going to a friend's house and being supervised after school until picked up.
Right. Yeah, you could have found some Marxist literature.
Yeah, I could have been at a friend's house and just been sifting through Playboy, right?
Yeah.
At least I was reading things that were, even if they were more mature than what I could comprehend at the time, at least it was reading and understanding things. It wasn't just flipping through pictures.
Oh, yeah. I remember in 4th and 5th grade, the school library, all the boys knew which book had, the nudity.
Well, National Geographic was, of course, what you would go to flip through, right?
Yeah, well, I had lots of, I had National Geographics. I remember when my grandfather gave us National Geographics, and damn it, some of the pages were ripped out, and I was like, I knew what they were, but I had some National Geographic that was, I had my go-to National Geographics, but there was also a go-to art book in the library, and for being 9 years old, it didn't disappoint.
Yeah, realistically, at that age, the Sears catalog didn't disappoint, right?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah, it didn't. Oh man,
talk about dating somebody. I know. When was the last time Sears actually mailed out a catalog in the first place?
When was the last time you could go to? When was the last time you could go to a Sears?
Isn't the one at the Galleria still technically open, even though it may or may not actually contain anything worth looking at?
I don't think so.
Maybe not. I guess more the way I look at it, the name is still in the building, so it hasn't been liquidated completely yet.
But yeah, I don't even know that I don't know. One of their, I would assume that Craftsman is their strongest brand, and the Craftsman tools are sold in Lowe's now. Like if you want to go buy a Craftsman tool, you go to Lowe's. But I don't think Sears is open.
The Craftsman brand was sold off early to, wasn't it Kmart that actually bought, or was it Kmart that bought Sears and then sold the Craftsman brand?
I don't know. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, there was a lot of really strange stuff when Sears was first having trouble, and I think it was Kmart that bought them and then sold the Craftsman brand in order to try to, I guess, well, I don't know if it was to stay afloat or if it was because that's just not their typical, market or what. I didn't follow it. I mean, I should have. I have a number of Craftsman tools that I bought specifically because I could just, take the damaged one in and replace it that now I guess I probably can't. But I also bought a number of Cobalt tools from Lowe's because they have a similar policy.
Oh, cool. Wow.
And none of this is related to Batman.
Yeah, I was just going to say, 4 years ago, Stanley Black & Decker acquired Craftsman from Sears Holdings, and they retained a limited license for Craftsman products. So it's very corporate.
Yeah, at this point, it's convoluted enough. I just don't care. I'll go buy a tool from wherever I need to buy it from, and if I need to replace it, I'll just replace it.
Really, for me at this point, like I've bought almost all Craftsman tools because my first job out of high school was working at a Sears store, so like I got discounts or I actually did not get discounts, but I knew when the sales were, so I was able to get a nice set of Craftsman tools. So anyway, back to Batman. What's your ranking of portrayals of Batman?
So I think it's pretty clear from when I started that I put Keaton at number one. I don't think anybody else has been able to bring me a better combination of Batman and Bruce Wayne. Christian Bale, I put second. And it goes back to my only real knock is just I don't like the voice, but I thought he did a good portrayal of the duality of the character in general. I thought he brought it to the screen in a great way. After that, I just can't rank anybody. I mean, if I were forced to, I would say actually Ben Affleck's portrayal, even though the films were horrible, his portrayal of both Batman and Bruce Wayne felt better to me than the others, so he would round out my top three. But I wouldn't say that it was a good or good enough. It was not a great portrayal at all. But it was good enough to not make me cringe.
That sounds about right.
And then, of course, on the flip side of that, like Michael Keaton and Christian Bale, to me, are just phenomenal portrayals. The only reason I cringe at all with Bale's portrayal is just the voice that he uses as Batman. And cringe might even be a little overly strong. It jars me out of the film a little bit when I listen to him.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Do you have a different ranking or
I don't.
Same or?
And honestly, I can see Ben. I haven't seen anything with Ben Affleck, but I could see him being better than George Clooney and Val Kilmer.
Yeah, I do think that Affleck gets the benefit of following Christian Bale and being able to give an idea of an older Bruce Wayne that's not necessarily up to 100% as far as he needs assistance to be able to compete. And so his portrayal of Batman was in a suit that was augmented, I guess is the proper way to think of it. And so you kind of are able to look beyond any shortcomings of his portrayal there, because the whole concept and idea and everything else about the execution of the film is just shit. And so you just don't judge him as Batman in the same way you do the others, to me. And so I judge him more on his portrayal of Bruce Wayne and whether anything about him being in the role pulled me out of the film. And the film does a great job of throwing you out of it on its own. It doesn't need an actor to do it for you. If anything, he at least tried to make it feel like another iteration of Batman and not a huge departure or different direction or anything else. And so I'm okay with it.
That seems about right, because DC's really, the people working the DC, Jon Favreau wanted to make a movie called Iron Man, and he did. And it was great. And he turned it into a 20-plus movie saga. And
he knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. And, they knocked it out of the park to the tune of, we made 22 more movies based on this, how well I did on this first Iron Man movie. And it's the most cohesive storytelling I think we've ever experienced. Looking at all of those movies and how well they fit together is sort of amazing. It's really good. Anyway, and you got DC over here, and they're like, or Warner, they've got to, it's like they own all of this, all of the rights to these characters, and they just struggle so hard. Joss Whedon made the first couple of Avengers movies, and just also knocked it out of the park. And then you get him over there, with Warner Brothers, and with it's a movie.
Yeah, and then, you're hitting around it. The biggest differentiator is that what we have seen from Marvel feels like a planned execution of the intellectual property and the interweaving stories in a way that gives you an immersive feeling to Marvel as a universe. What we get from DC is one or two films that might be cohesive together, and then someone is changed or brought in and has a different view and direction, or there's a disruption to that cohesiveness. And so none of the bigger forays into the space make sense together. You had Batman and Batman Returns, and then you had nothing that fits in that environment. You had the Christopher Nolan series, but nothing else fits into that series. And so you have so many of these that feel different enough from each other and don't complement each other. Whereas on the Marvel side, you've got 372 movies that talk about each other in some way, shape, fashion, or form is what it feels like.
Yeah, you have, they struggled with Hulk for a bit, but that's because it's difficult to make an interesting Hulk movie. And they just left it alone. There were no more Hulk movies. Hulk appeared in movies, but there were no more Hulk movies. For a movie, it's a flaw. He's a flawed character to be the primary the protagonist of a movie, because the whole time he's Bruce Banner is trying to not be the Hulk, and all we want to see is the Hulk smash things. So it's a hard movie. So I mean, that's the only place where they kind of fell down, but it's like it's hardly even noticeable, because then you see the Hulk in multiple Avenger movies and a Thor movie, and it's like, this is cool. We see the Hulk in a way we've never seen the Hulk, and like how he was in, you know, the Smart Hulk in Endgame was awesome, because now they've opened it up to make more cool Hulk movies where where you get what you want. But the only thing that has been truly a grand slam for DC for DC comic movies is Joker. And it is, it was a hard sell, because it's R-rated. There's not a lot of violence, but the violence that's in there is incredibly gritty, and it's it's in the Batman saga, but you don't see Batman at all. And so it ended up being like, I ended up having like a budget of like $60 million, which is like nothing for a comic book character movie. And it ended up grossing over $1 billion in the first month. It's like kind of ridiculous out there. It's their most successful movie, and it has very little comic bookness, if that's a thing.
Well, it is now. If it didn't exist prior, we've defined it here.
Sure, excellent. we have planted our small flag into the ground.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to mention, just as a point, with the stumblings with the Hulk, those films also took place prior to the MCU as we know it today.
Yes.
So once Disney acquired the rights to Marvel, or acquired Marvel, or whatever the overall corporate,
Marvel Studios.
Once Disney took the reins, the MCU as we know it came into existence. Prior to that, you had two different portrayals of the Hulk in two different films, right? You had Ang Lee's Hulk.
That was before. Like, I feel like everything.
I mean, that was well before. Yes.
Yeah, that's 5 years before. It was 5 years before Iron Man.
And then Edward Norton's Hulk, the movie was The Incredible Hulk, right? That one was the one that was closer in proximity to Disney acquiring Marvel.
Right. Ang Lee's Hulk is not a part of the MCU, but Edward Norton's Hulk is.
Okay.
It's part of the MCU.
I couldn't remember the timing overlay well. I do remember there being a discussion where Norton himself did not want to reprise the role.
Yeah, I think there were conflicts, and I don't know, something like that. Maybe it was personal, like, I don't want to do it. But he handed the reins over to Ruffalo.
All that being said, the main reason I wanted to kind of point it out is I really loved Edward Norton's portrayal. I thought it was a good film. I didn't think it was great. It certainly wasn't on the same level of success as subsequent MCU films. But I thought it was a good movie, and I really liked what he brought to the character. It felt more like what I expected a Hulk / Bruce Banner dichotomy to feel like. And just overall, I thought they did a great job with it.
Yeah, it's one of those that it's like, it's the one movie you're like, is it a part? You question whether or not it's part of the MCU, but it is, and they told that story, and that was the best way you could tell that story, and then you made the Hulk became they used Hulk the right way for the movies, and I think they even opened up the character of Hulk to be used in even better ways. But it's probably I feel like it was probably the least watched MCU movie, that and the second Thor movie, which I didn't hate.
Yeah, I know a lot of people seem to want to pile on that one for some reason. it's not one that I gravitate toward rewatching, but it was not one that I disliked immensely either. So, I don't know, maybe I just don't get it. I will say, though, the third one...
Ragnarok?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That is the way Thor movies need to be done from this point forward.
I agree. I mean, they took advantage of, Chris Hemsworth is a great comic actor. I hate to say this, and it feels misogynistic to say this, but he is the only good thing that I liked about the new Ghostbusters. Like, he was fantastic in that movie. And so, with Thor Ragnarok, they really took Thor into a really cool direction, and I love where they went with that. Same director is going to be directing the fourth Thor movie, and so I think we'll see more of the Thor we want to see. And the only reason I would watch the second Thor movie again is because of how it, how much it affected Endgame. Like having watched Endgame a couple of times, I'd like to rewatch that second Thor movie because they go back to events that occurred in that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. The way all the films have kind of woven a story together is fascinating because it hasn't been done on that scale before. And if you take a moment to appreciate that you don't have to watch all of them and you can still understand the story, like it's pretty marvelous, actually, that they were able to pull it off in a way that makes sense to the average watcher who may only watch the Avengers titled movies but still be able to understand everything that's happening.
It's truly a work of art. That whole, how many pieces you can pick up and how piecemeal you can make that series of I think it's 23 movies is sort of phenomenal.
It's reminiscent of the way comics would do crossover events. You would have like Captain America comics and Iron Man comics and Thor comics. So you'd have their individual storylines, but then you would have a crossover event that would span however many comics, however many they decided to use for the story. And it might be this issue of Captain America and followed by this issue of Iron Man and this issue of Thor that would tell the cohesive story. Or they might do a spin-off series where you had, a dozen comics with a particular title that took place following, this particular issue of these individual comics. The way the MCU has been able to do the films feels like it's a manifestation of that on screen. And there's a certain level of appreciation there that I don't think most people understand because they don't understand the source material. And it's something that we've wanted so long for the X-Men series and have been continually let down.
Yeah. But, X-Men, that first X-Men movie was a good movie.
The second one was decent as well.
It was. It sort of started to open things up. But I love somebody put forth that the Blade was really the movie that, I think Blade was actually the first Marvel Studios movie. And it's what opened up, it was the first time they made a movie based on a comic book character that was, I think it was the first R-rated comic book character movie. And it was the first gritty comic book character movie, you could say.
And you could even go so far as to say it was the first actually successful comic book movie. The others may have made themselves successful from a financial standpoint or whatever, what I mean in this case is that Blade appealed to a larger mass of the population than a quote-unquote comic book movie would appeal to the same percentage of the population.
Right. I mean, the only comic book character that we saw in movies prior to Blade was Batman and Superman.
Which both have, their own cult following anyway, and status in pop culture just from recognizability. I wonder how many people saw and loved Blade and never even realized it was a comic book film.
Oh, that was
adaptation.
Me. Oh, that was me. It was much later that I found out Blade was a comic book character. I think the thing is, it's like by the time you get to the mid '90s with after having 2 Batman movies and oh god, how many? I don't know how. It was like 4 or 5 Superman movies in the '80s. It's like at that point, those characters were, at that point, I think, more known for their movies than their comic books. Whereas Blade was, comic book character in a movie.
Well,
he was the first new comic book character in a movie for decades.
And the other thing to really kind of harp on and point at, it was during a time where Wesley Snipes was a very well-known action film hero. And for many people, this was just another action film. It just happened to have vampires in the story.
Yeah. So I heard that they're going to make a new or remake Blade movies, and I'm kind of scared. But, they're doing good otherwise. So I guess, the last thing I was going to ask you was there anything you wanted to mention about the Batman movies?
Did I put a note in there that I should have remembered?
No. I just,
okay.
thought.
I was drawing a blank because I think we've covered everything that I was going to, or everything that was on my mind. I was far more interested in the character portrayals than delving into the movies necessarily.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. I don't think I have anything else on Batman. My
only thing was, I thought that Drew Barrymore was wasted in Batman Forever. It was one of those things where it's like, I remember watching that movie and it's like, oh my god, that's Drew Barrymore. And like I had to like confirm that in the credits, but like she's totally in that movie, and she barely has any dialogue. She barely has any screen time, and she's she could have been used in a better way. So, but that's also like saying Shumacher could have used George Clooney in a much better way. Totally wasted. But the main thing as far as characters go, I loved Michael Gough as Alfred, and I would have never thought that there would be anyone that portrayed Alfred in a way that I thought was as good as Gough's portrayal. But Michael Caine is every bit as good as Gough. He did it. His Alfred fits Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne Batman, and I thought that was pretty cool. I think Michael Caine was like kind of a big name to get to play that character.
Yeah, I think so. I love Caine's Alfred. There's not a single thing I could knock against it other than some of the writing he had to deliver in the third film, but that's not on him. I mean,
right.
He did very well with what he had.
He was contractually obligated to say those things.
Yeah. But I thought he was absolutely perfect for the role. There was never a point where I disagreed with anything about his portrayal of Alfred. To me, it was absolutely spot on.
Well, I remember when the name of the movie, the Superman movie Superman versus Batman. I remember when that movie was like around the time right before it came, released, and people were saying that if you're trying to draw a crowd for your Superman movie by putting Batman in it, you're failing at a Superman movie. And it made me think about, like, we were trying to have a discussion about, portrayal of Batman, and we started talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I draw a comparison there. There's something analogous there. But it was that, anytime you start talking about comic book movies, you have to talk, it's hard not to talk about Marvel.
Well, and in fairness, I'd say it's also hard not to talk about Batman. So even if the conversation had started with Marvel, I think Batman would have been interwoven into the conversation at some point.
That might have been what happened last week, and that's how we got here to doing it this week. This show.
Entirely possible.
Yeah. I'm fairly confident that's exactly what we did. And I guess the last thing I was gonna say was I think Batman the Animated Series is probably one of the best cartoons that was ever made.
Yeah, I have nothing to argue with on that one. I did not watch it at the time that it originally aired. That was something that I didn't see until later, and I still have a fond appreciation of the series.
I watched it when it was on, when I could. It was a bit tricky because even that was a bit too much for my parents to let me watch, but they, there were times where like, we'll check it out and see if it's okay. And it's a solid cartoon. It's one that I would watch with my kids, or I would rewatch as they watch for the first time.
Yeah, I don't remember when it was. At some point, you could buy the complete series on iTunes for a very inexpensive price during one of the random sales, and so I bought it.
Yeah, I think I had first few episodes on DVD, but I noticed that the entire run is on HBO Max right now. I think every Batman movie except for the 66 movie is on HBO Max right now.
Interesting. I might have to go take a look. Actually, I think I have all of them anyway, except for the 66 film in Plex.
Yeah, I have the 66 film in Plex. I had it on DVD for, I don't know why I bought it. It's like, I think it was the second DVD I ever bought.
I probably had it on VHS, because I know at some point I had a copy of it, but I know I do not currently have a copy of it in any format that I can watch. Of course, I also probably wouldn't go back and watch it at this point anyway, so.
Yeah, it's tough.
It sounded like you were about to say something. I was about to say I think that's pretty much all I've got on Batman.
That's what I was gonna say. So Gotham City is New York City. Where's Metropolis?
I'd always just kind of internalized that Gotham City and Metropolis were supposed to be, for the most part, neighbors, and it was just two variants of New York City based on which universe you were, paying attention to, so to speak. If you were to actually pick a city it was based off of, I guess LA would be the first one I would think of, but it's not based off of that type of distance between the cities in the comic universe.
Yeah. Was there any overlap of Superman and Batman until this, whatever movie a few years ago came out?
Not on the screen. There has been, of course, when you talk about source material.
Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's all I got.
Well, I think that's a good spot to call it then.
Yeah. So I guess join us next week on the same Bat channel at the same Bat time.
I'm going to have to find a copy of the theme song and let it play before the outro. See whether we get any copyright complaints.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
follow us on Instagram and Twitter at untitled_hosts. Send us an email at untitled.hosts@gmail.com or follow the feed directly at theUntitledPodcast.com. You can also find all sorts of ways to contact Jesse at jthart.com. Thank you for listening. That's a wrap.